you continue telling your brain that each of the information I am going to be providing, put them in short-term memory, trust me, that's where your brain will keep them. And at the end of the day, after a very long time, when you need this information, you can't produce them because they were kept in short-term memory.
Hi guys, welcome to my channel. If you have been following for some while now, you may know that I've been dropping videos on study techniques, study tips, how you can improve yourself academically. So if you are just joining and this is your first video in this channel, do well to hit the subscribe button so that you don't get to miss any other video which I am going to be dropping. Alright guys, so in today's video I'm going to be telling you about two powerful study techniques that you can actually utilize in your study and see how effective and productive your study is going to be. Have you ever been in a situation you prepare for an exam and at the end of the day you pass this exam very well, and after a few weeks the information you put down for this exam you can't even remember any of them? Sounds familiar, right? So in today's video, the two important powerful techniques I'm going to be sharing with you actually helps you to retain information for a very long period of time. So even after your exam, you don't need to worry or get scared about forgetting all of the information that you have read. So it's a kind of long-term memory study technique. Alright, so what are these techniques? Active recall and spaced repetition. So what exactly is active recall? Active recall is more like you actively trying to retrieve information from your brain rather than passively rereading or listening to someone. Okay, so what exactly is this active recall? Most of the times when we try to read and discover that we have forgotten what we have read, what we just tend to do is, okay, we read it passively and try to see if it's going to stick. At the end of the day, we end up cramming, and this actually helps us pass the exam but wouldn't stay in our brain for a very long period of time. So active recall actually does the work. So like I said, active recall is you retrieving information from the brain. Active. Imagine active recall as you trying to remember the phone number of a friend which you learned few days ago. Alright, so you aren't going to check anywhere or any book or any phone to get to know that phone number. So you actually use your brain, and this actively engages your brain and see if actually those phone numbers were stored. So doing, you actually give your brain lots of work by actively trying to bring out information. And trust me, guess what, when your brain actually gets to know that you are actively engaging it, it gets adapted to that active nature and keeps information for a very long period of time. So what exactly happens when we study? So when we study, what happens is that most of the stuffs are moved to our short-term memory. Okay, so if we don't retrieve this information, we tend to forget this information. But when we actively retrieve the information, what happens is that the brain moves the information from short-term memory to long-term memory, and that stays there because the brain knows that, oh, there was a time you actively tried to recall this thing. So now, what is spaced repetition? Now take note that active recall and spaced repetition are two different things. Spaced repetition is you trying to retrieve information within intervals. Okay, so there are increasing intervals you give yourself. Alright, so spaced repetition, the difference between spaced repetition and active recall is that, let me give an illustration. I can just be sitting down and decide to, oh, what was that thing I read yesterday night, and try to recall it. What I've just done is active recall. But now spaced repetition has a timing, it has intervals. So I tend to give myself intervals at which I'm going to go through what I have read or review what I have read. Alright, so and there are various methods and various ways you can actually practice active recall and spaced repetition. Okay, so what are the ways you can practice active recall and spaced repetition? One of the ways I use is actually creating flashcards. Okay, so flashcards are basically cards that help you remember everything you read. And how does this work? So the card has a front and has a back. So at the front you tend to write the question, and at the back you write the answer. So each time you pick up your flashcard, you see the question, then you try to remember the answer to that question.
Okay, so this is how the flashcard actually works. So most of the time it's kind of difficult to create a hard copy flashcard. So most of the time it is digital flashcard, and so there are flashcards softwares that you can use to create flashcards. One of the flashcard software I recommend is Quizlet. Okay, so Quizlet allows you to create flashcards. So at regular intervals you can come to the app and ensure you check the flashcards to know if actually what you wrote down or what you saved in the flashcard you can still recall and bring out this information. So basically flashcards is one of the ways you can use to practice speech repetition. Then looking at active recall, you can practice active recall by trying to actively recall what you have read by teaching others. When you teach others, you are trying to actively recall. When you try to review your notes without looking at it, you are actively recalling information. Practicing questions without looking at answers. So when you pick up your past question and you're like, okay, this, without looking at the answer, what you are doing is active recall. Okay, so the next thing is, what exactly are the benefits of this active recall and spaced repetition? Okay, so having talked about the application and how we can use active recall and spaced repetition, what are actually the benefits if I should implement active recall? Alright, so the first benefit is enhanced long-term memory. So like I said earlier, what active recall and spaced repetition does is that it creates this or builds this long-term memory. Okay, so you tend to keep information for a very long period of time because you are actively recalling this information. So this brings us to the forgetting cough. Alright, so forgetting cough proves that we are actually meant to forget what we have read. So scientifically it is proven that when you read you tend to forget, and so this cough shows you the period at which you tend to forget. So after one day you should remember about some percentage of what you have read. So the second day the same thing, so the third day. So when it gets to the seventh day you will see that you actually remember about less than 10% of what you have read. And you can see if you continue to prolong without going back to those stuffs you have studied. So imagine studying something and after 1 month you don't go back to it. Imagine if after 7 days you will have less than 10%, then after 1 month, trust me, you have less than 1%. So what active recall does and spaced repetition is that it actually creates this long-term memory, so your brain gets adapted to it. So what happens is that the short-term memory where informations are falsely kept, your brain moves it from the short-term to the long-term memory, so it enhances long-term memory. Then secondly, it improves critical thinking. So an active recaller is someone who can think critically, because there's sometimes you just active recall, there's sometimes you just sit alone and you're trying to recall what you have read. Now this actually makes you to think critically, because you can't just be distracted playing and expect to recall what you have read. No, you have to sit down quietly, try to remember, okay, what exactly did I read? So it actually improves critical thinking. Thirdly, it increases learning efficiency. Alright, so one thing that active recall and spaced repetition does is that it makes you faster while studying. So something that you have actively recalled and within spaced intervals you try to go back to it when it's time for exam period, you wouldn't waste time with that particular material or with that particular information, because you have already absorbed it with active recall and spaced repetition. Then the next one is reduced test anxiety. So most of the time why people get anxiety during exam or during test period is the fact that they can't even recall what they have read, and even sometimes when they can recall it, the anxiety is still there. Why? Because they have not been used to the exam system. So what thing active recall does is that active recall brings that examination feeling to you. So there are several times I've actively recalled information, and the next question I asked myself is, wait, what if this was an exam scenario? What would I have done? So this actually tells my brain that, oh, these informations, I must not joke with them. I must actively recall them from time to time. Then another thing it also does is that it increases your motivation. So now imagine that you see yourself improving. Alright, so let me take for instance myself. When I was a first year medical student and my senior colleagues used to say some of these anatomical terms, physiology, biochemistry, they were somehow strange to me, and I was like, Jesus, how do I survive learning these stuffs? And oh my god, so one day I'll get to this stage and I'm going to be saying all these things that they're saying, like how manage. And now here I am, and it feels so motivating having to know that these stuffs you already know them and you're getting used to them. Why? Because of that active recall. So imagine each time you read you forget, each time you read you forget, and you don't go back to these stuffs, you don't actively recall them, you don't have spaced repetition at which you check them back. Trust me, you'll be demotivated. But each time when you actively recall and you see that, wow, I can still remember some of these facts, spaced repetition, you bring back those information as spaced intervals, you will see that you'll be motivated to even continue. So having known what active recall and spaced repetition is now, imagine implementing these two guys into your study. That is going to be a blast, trust me, because you are actively going to keep information in your brain. So it is actually very possible to control your brain rather than your brain controlling you. Okay, so when you whatever you put in your brain that your brain returns back. If you continue telling your brain that each of the information I am going to be providing, put them in short-term memory, trust me, that's where your brain will keep them. And at the end of the day, after a very long time, when you need this information, you can't produce them because they were kept in short-term memory. And one danger about information in short-term memory is after a period of time, those information tend to leave your brain. Your brain automatically deletes those information because it considers it as not important. But when it is in the long-term memory, so now that you know what active recall and spaced repetition is, you can now implement it into your study and see how productive and effective your study will be from now. Alright, so if you have watched this video to this point and you still have some confusions about active recall and spaced repetition, and you still need to know more about active recall and spaced repetition, do well to signify in the comment section. Alright, so give this video a thumbs up, share to your loved ones, share to your colleagues, share to your classmates, share to your families, so everyone can improve academically. Alright, so ensure you subscribe to this channel so you don't end up missing any video that I am going to be dropping. Bye guys.